Hi, John. Hi. Hi, Jason.
We're ready to go. You guys are.
All right.
Okay. We're on the record here.
We're on the record? Okay. This is the regular meeting of the Montclair Historic Preservation Commission. Notice has been given in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of the municipal building and by sending a copy to the Montclair Times, Star Ledger, and Herald News. Roll call. Chair Bennett is absent. Vice Chair Heineman present. Commissioner Greenbaum.
Present.
Commissioner Rooney.
Here.
Commissioner Kane-Levy.
Here.
Commissioner Reimitz.
Here.
Mr. Petto.
Here.
Mr. Angelo is absent. Mr. Karasik is here in his stead. And Mr. Connolly.
Here.
All right, so the first item on the agenda is the committee appointments. We're going to carry that to the March meeting, but in the interim, I just wanted to essentially take a straw poll of commissioners who are interested in the various committees. Mr. Petto did provide a memo outlining the different committees and the responsibilities in the packet, so they're available for your review. The first committee is the Education and Outreach Committee. Is anybody interested in that committee? Steve is on.
I'm on it now.
Okay.
And I'm also on the landmarks nomination.
I don't have the description of it.
It was in your packet. Would you like to?
Yeah.
Sure.
So
Do you have an extra agenda?
we'll be finalizing this next meeting, but again, just taking a straw poll, make sure everybody's on the same page. And Steve, you're interested in continuing those?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone else interested in education outreach or landmarks? Minor application, I'm on that, and I'm open to continue. If you're open to continue, okay. You'd like to? Okay. The revisions committee. Who's on the revisions committee? Aren't you, John?
Currently, it's Mr. Reimnitz and Chair Bennett.
Okay.
I wouldn't mind being on it too.
Okay. And design review and redevelopment. Okay, John and David. All right, great. So hopefully next week we can just move right through that. Next item is the approval of the minutes. Does anybody have any corrections, revisions, comments?
I wasn't here last time.
No, I think it's...
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes as drafted?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in?
Can't say anything.
Caroline with a second. All in favor?
Aye.
With one abstention. Next item is the nomination of officers. Again, we'll carry that till the next meeting when Chair Bennett is available. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong thing. Next item is public comment. Is there anyone here for public comment? The next item are committee reports, and the application and procedures report, I understand, is also being carried. Graham, are we going to go over the design review and redevelopment committee report?
Yes, we should
okay.
review that.
Let's do that.
Section.
Right, you got to get that in.
Would you like me to give a little bit of summary
Yes,
background?
please.
Sure. So the Township Council has developed an amendment to the Haynes redevelopment plan. The Design Review and Redevelopment Subcommittee of the HPC met on Friday, February 8th to review the amendment to the plan. So they conducted a review and recommended a few changes. And a memo was provided in your packet from the Design Review and Redevelopment Committee to the full commission that details the proposed modifications to the amended plan. The amended plan is specifically addressing the Church Street lot to permit construction of a new building on the Church Street lot. And we have two of our committee members that were present at that meeting, Mr. Reimnitz and Mr. Greenbaum, here this evening. So I don't know if they want to expound a little bit upon some of the decision-making that went into the memorandum here. But essentially, I'll review kind of the high-level changes that...
Yeah, can you just start with just the context of that lot, what was proposed for in the original plan?
So
and
that
then
I'm
what
not
the proposed,
How original.
what's currently
Classic
in effect, what the proposal for that lot was, and what the proposed amendments are in this.
The original lot was proposed to either be a hotel or a multiple dwelling, apartment building with retail on the first floor, among other uses, but those were the main expected uses. The hotel ended up in another location, as you know. So it was, at that point, the plan had about a 55 unit per acre apartment building. Then the assisted living people bought the lot and came along, and the plan was amended to allow assisted living as a permitted use. And ultimately, as you know, that project didn't happen. And so that was the current plan. I'm trying to think if it was changed again since then, but basically that was the last iteration.
Okay.
Now the iteration is to allow for, again, multiple dwelling, but they wanted increased density. So they wanted density from 55 to, I believe, 74 or 90 units an acre.
Yeah, 74 total units.
74 total units, which would put it at 30,000 feet plus, so it's about 90 units an acre. So that's what the plan is now.
And how does the plan now relate to what we saw here? We saw a preliminary plan that came in a few months ago.
I haven't followed all the details, but I think when we saw the very preliminary plans, it was more of a blocking out, massing the buildings rather than really designed. I think the current plan's more detailed, though, Graham?
Yeah, I don't know exactly.
I mean, there's the setbacks have been adjusted. That's more, as much as I know. I don't want to give you wrong answers.
And there are no affordable housing implications, right? Because
There'll be affordable housing in this project.
but in terms of requirements, because isn't Montclair, they have a zero fair share?
We have a requirement, an ordinance which requires a 20% set aside. But in redevelopments, we've been negotiating that, and in this particular case, the Economic Development Committee negotiated a 10% set aside, which was what was pretty much in the original plan. The original plan had a 10% set aside, and this plan still does. The planning board, by the way, has recommended a 20%. But the council didn't go with that the last time around.
Okay. But there's no fixed number that that the town has to rely upon in terms of, but a fixed number, as if there's a fair share obligation.
No.
Okay.
Oh no, we have. We've met any obligation to the state. So this is pretty much an issue that's in town. We're not compelled by the state.
Now, on Monday night, the planning board, we reviewed it. It's 20% that they're asking for. They're asking for a 15-foot setback in front of the building, 20 feet on the west side of the building, 5 feet, it's 5 or 15, I can't remember, going on the north and east side. And then there is, on the second or third floor, there's an amenity space that pulls it back 30 feet. And hold it at 5 stories.
Can you just repeat that? Those specs?
That on the front of the building,
Front?
15 feet,
And that's on the sidewalk?
It's on the sidewalk, pulling it back from the sidewalk 15 feet.
Well, he hasn't reviewed that. He hasn't seen that yet.
And then on the west side, 20 feet?
West side is 20 feet from the property line.
I think the north and east side, 15 or 5, I can't remember right now.
Is this what you know?
And it's a total of 5 stories, and how many step backs? Well, that drawing that you're looking at there was from our presentation.
That's from your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
This gets moved back 15 feet from here, from the street. And then there's a setback here, and setback here, and setback here. And then there's a big setback on this, it's either the 2nd or 3rd floor, where they're having an amenity, like space for that residence, and it goes back 30 feet.
Was there a reaction from the planning board to the presentation at this point?
I didn't like it.
They did or did not?
They did not.
Was that, so the current status of the application is that it's still under review?
It's under review. I mean, this report that we sent out from the planning board couldn't encompass this because it didn't come in time. So this will have to go straight to the
Yeah, just to clarify, the decision-making process here is at the council level, correct?
Yeah, it's
District
at the
Council?
I can
level.
tell you, let me just tell you where the process is at. The council proposed an amendment to the redevelopment plan, which was proposed at the council level. As required by law, it was referred to the planning board. Planning board made certain comments and sent their comments back to the council. The council
And
then...
the planning board has a statutory time frame within which.
Right.
Right, they
that
have
is
to, they have 45 days to respond to the referral. The planning board made certain comments. For example, the council had said 10% affordable housing, the planning board said 20%, and several things regarding setbacks. Sent it back to the council. The council then amended the ordinance, the plan, to take into account some of what the planning board said, but to be fair, the amendment, they didn't agree with everything the planning board said or asked for in their memo. So then the amended plan was sent back to the planning board for the planning board to give its comments on. So this is the second time back to the planning board.
Mm-hmm.
The planning board has now made comments on the amended plan, and the next step would be for the council to schedule a public hearing and vote on the plan, unless the council wants to amend it again.
Right.
And since the planning board's comments were just memorialized into a memo today, the council hasn't seen what the planning
No,
board is recommending. So once they see it, they'll have the opportunity when it's scheduled again, which I can't say when, but it won't be at this next council meeting because it's too soon. There's no time to schedule the hearing on the 5th. The council meeting after that's the 19th of March, which is possibly when.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead. I have a question too.
Is this, Graham, just to be sure, this is within the commercial historic district, yes?
Correct, and that's why you guys are making comments, your own comment letter to the
How was it
council.
referred to the Historic Preservation Commission?
It was not. There is no statutory requirement that requires the referral. The HPC is making comments, though, because of its location in the district.
Did the
So
planning
it wasn't
board-
referred to us, but because it's there, we automatically pick it up in order to make comments? And the comments were supposed to go to the planning board, or they go directly?
These comments are going to go directly to the council.
And that was always the intent?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
And just from my own understanding, this is an area of redevelopment, an old one, if I'm not mistaken, is that correct?
It's what's left of the Haynes redevelopment plan. Haynes redevelopment area included what's down in Sienna.
Right.
I believe it may have included the Crescent Deck, or at least that was done at the same time. And then it included the lot across the street, which used to be a Haynes parking lot, which is the Church Street lot we're talking about now.
So I'm just wondering, why, just to help me understand, why procedurally does the planning board not have the voting authority on it? Because it's an area of redevelopment?
Yes, and it's governed by a redevelopment plan.
Right.
An amendment to the redevelopment plan is essentially an ordinance.
by the council.
But it has to go for site plan approval.
Oh, it does have to go to site
Yeah,
plan?
It
once-
will go.
Once the
Yeah.
redevelopment plan is adopted, then the developer's going to prepare a site plan and then come back, go to the planning board.
Will
And
it
the
come to
planning board will
And
have
that
the
will come here
opportunity
first.
and that will be referred here as well.
It will be
'cause it's
referred
in
here
the-
first before it goes to the planning board
Oh,
for the
right.
construction
Right.
phase, for the
So-
development of the
so-
site.
But obviously, the redevelopment plan sets the zoning, so this is kind of an important part of
Got it.
Yeah.
the procedure.
Got it,
Can
thank
I
you.
just speak to this? before we go
Well,
on?
before you go there, I'll tell you what the planning board did, is that we decided that the multifamily development doesn't need to be mixed use. They didn't feel that another retail establishment on Church Street would make any difference, because there's nothing across the street from it that's commercial and west. It's only east. And so to pull it down, it's like, it doesn't work.
Sorry, so you're saying they don't need to do retail on the ground floor?
No, it's not gonna, it doesn't have to be doesn't have to be mixed use.
But they can if they choose to.
They can if they choose to. The community space, they had put in 1,000 square feet of community space, should be a space at the ground level open to the public rather than a small community room. The affordable housing should be 20%. The front yard setback is 15 feet. The rear side setback is also 15 feet. The minimum setback above the third floor is 10.
I'm
And
sorry, repeat that, the minimum setback above which
the
floor?
third floor is 10 feet on all sides. And the definition of rooftop amenities should be provided clearly to indicate that these amenities are limited to the residential units. That's the recommendations.
Are there renderings that are on the website?
No.
Right, so John, you wanted to discuss
Well,
the actual...
some of this, obviously, I mean, the planning board is being more restrictive than our little diagram that we've created.
Yeah.
The only comment I would make is, as it relates to our historic guidelines, that, you know, from the HPC point of view, it says we're supposed to respect uniform setbacks along a block in new construction. So, obviously, the planning board had decided to set it back 15 feet, but it could be residential on the ground floor. So that 15 feet, what is the 15 feet? Is that going to be used by, how, is that public space?
Yeah.
That 15 feet? Okay.
It's public, private, you know, it's a sidewalk.
It'll be sidewalk. It isn't just that building is set back and they still occupy the 15 feet off the property line.
Well, they'd still own it.
Okay, so I guess the question is it going to be someone's front yard if it's going to be residential on the ground?
We don't know that. The one problem is on the east side, there's kind of there's a building there. It's got a dumpster and stuff like that, and they want to dress that up. Whether that's this project that does it, or it's an incentive to the owner of that place to dress it up, or just plant a tree. I don't know. We'll have to see what the next iteration is. The idea was to set it back, maybe so it lines up with the buildings on Church. The church, you know, the library. I don't know how far back that is.
The Carnegie Library?
Mm-hmm.
What's the maximum height? Did they indicate that in the specs?
5 stories.
But they didn't say the height of the store, the total
No,
height?
No.
Do you think that's something that can be added? A total height?
We could add it, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, is that something that's added, but that would be in the ordinance stage, not in the site plan stage?
No, yeah.
This is the ordinance stage.
Right,
These
so what I'm saying is,
recommendations. So
but-
if you think
We can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these are our recommendations to the council.
Right, I think we did. We specifically said 55 feet,
65.
to 65?
What did we say? What did we suggest?
I think
Number
we were trying
2.
to match, our goal was to match the height of the former Wedgwood
Yeah,
building.
maximum height of 65 feet.
should we make it not
Item
to
2.
exceed the height of the?
It says the committee recommends supplementing the bulk standards for Church Street lots, specifically item 1, the maximum building height to incorporate a
Yeah.
maximum height of 65 feet in addition to the 5 stories permitted. So
Right.
that's addressed in this.
Okay.
So we're making that recommendation.
Right. So I think if, there are two things that were very specific that I know we talked about. One is that we wanted to move the density, this is for the benefit of everyone here.
Okay. But is it in the report?
Yes.
Okay, then everyone's
It's in-
reviewed it.
it's in the
Is there
report.
anything else that we need to discuss? Are there any objections to what's in the report? Or if everyone's satisfied, we could have a motion
Good
to approve it.
Could you explain to me
finalize it and
paragraph
submit
3,
it.
because it's very dense.
Well, it describes this little diagram, if you're reading.
Okay.
Okay. And I think the intent of this diagram, this is what David was trying to say, was we were trying to move the mass of the building to the rear and corner of the lot.
Mhm.
We were trying to hold the facade, as per our historic guidelines, HPC guidelines, we were trying to hold the front facade as it starts at the corner of South Park and Church, and bring it down along Church Street and align the second floor setback with that same line in order to establish consistent storefronts and
Yeah.
facade along Church Street. That was the intent. After that, it's some
Yeah, because
setbacks
the
and so on.
planning board just moved everything back 15 feet,
Yeah.
because they feel that it's a transitional space,
Right.
and it's, we have all of these
I
landmark
don't-
buildings
I think
around.
it's not a bad idea. I guess the question is it public space or is it belong to the front yard? Since there's no longer retail on the ground floor, it becomes residential.
It's residential.
Someone
Don't know
puts
if-
their barbecue out front.
Don't
I'm
know,
just asking,
don't
I'm
know.
just asking.
Well, but-
Do not know where that's
Yeah,
going to
I think
happen.
That's not.
Well, the
good
entrance,
transition space.
do they envision-
That's a good idea.
The entrance is not changed.
the entrance is on the side, opposite the
on-
Carnegie Library?
Yeah, in that southwest corner.
Okay. So can we add language that says that with regards to any setback from the street, that space is made accessible and unimpeded by pedestrian traffic?
I kind of think that that's where it's going to be, but it's,
It doesn't say that. I would either make it
You can
retail
say-
or say it's public, it's
Yeah.
open
Yeah.
space.
Well, we're advising.
From the HPC.
No, I'm saying,
right.
So that's the only thing I would
Well,
add, because we
it-
didn't have the benefit of that knowledge when we prepared this.
Well, that was just the planning board's thought. If you had, independent thoughts and recommendations, these are our recommendations. They don't have to mirror what the planning board is recommending.
Right.
Got it.
All right.
But being that if we want to be informed by their recommendations, we could suggest that if in fact there are setbacks from the street, that, if that is the direction that it's gone in, we would recommend that space be accessible to public pedestrian
Okay.
traffic.
So then what we could do is recommendation 3, when you talk about setbacks, add a sentence before that indicating that the first 2 floors should be set back, 20 feet? What's
No, it's 15.
15.
15 is what they're
If-
saying.
If there's any setback on the first floor along Church
Yeah.
Street, that it's accessible.
Well, I mean,
to-
you should say the whole building, because the last thing that I saw was, it was built out to the street, but the first floor was an arcade,
Oh, I see.
and then they had 2 floors of residential going out to the street, and that committee said to push it back, the whole thing back 15 feet.
Yeah. So I like that, but I don't know, we can comment that we support that? Would that be fair?
Again, if it's.
We haven't seen it yet, so I'm just
Yeah.
kind of telling you.
So
now.
what do we want to put in here in terms of, do we want no setback as is currently recommended, or do we want the 15-foot setback with the provision that it is publicly accessible?
I second that.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so
Okay.
can I have a motion to approve these recommendations with that amendment?
You got that, Graham?
I need a motion.
Oh, motion to accept the plan with the amendment as suggested.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Was there discussion of materiality at all in the meeting?
Materials have to be the same all the way around the building.
Okay.
And we're moving on. We're still in the committee reports section. I'm going to table the remainder of the discussion till after the applications because it is 10 after 8, just about. So then there's no old business. New business, we have a referral from the Board of Adjustment, application 2558, 14 Undercliff Road, and 172 Lloyd Road, 114 Undercliff LLC.
Evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Alan Tremulak. I'm the attorney for 14 Undercliff Road, LLC. No doubt everyone is familiar with the property that we're dealing with tonight. It's been the subject of a lot of discussion, perhaps controversy.
Yes. And not to interrupt you, Mr. Tremulak, just so we don't get moving too far, can I just have your witnesses sworn in? That
Sure.
will just roll.
With me is Tom Hickey from Grade Architecture Firm that prepared the plans. He'll be the witness tonight.
Mr. Hickey, would you raise your right hand, please? You solemnly swear that the testimony you're going to give this commission is the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Could you just state your name and your affiliation, please?
My name is Thomas Hickey. I'm a partner at Grade Architecture.
Thank you so much.
All right. And just to give the commission context, this is an application from the zoning board based on variances. The subject property is in the estate section, which is a historic section identified as a potential historic district in the preservation master plan element. The applicant proposes to demolish each of the existing dwellings on Lot 2 and 3. The applicant proposes to consolidate the two lots into one new lot and construct a new dwelling. The proposed new dwelling will include 8 bedrooms, a home office area, an indoor pool, a swimming pool with adjacent pool house and garage area. The variance sought are bulk variances. The applicant requires a variance of the minimum rear yard setback requirement, which is 30% of the depth of the lot. The subject lot, once consolidated, requires a rear yard setback of 141.1 feet. The applicant proposes a rear yard setback of 25 feet 8 inches. There's also a variance for the maximum number of off-street parking for a single family. The maximum is 4. They're proposing an 11-car garage. And in the materials that I saw, there was mention of a height variance. Is that still on the table?
The applicant, in the revised plans that were submitted dated, what was the date of those plans? February 14th, 2019, the applicant has eliminated the need for the height variance.
And for the historic context, the estate area was developed by wealthy Montclair residents between the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The area consists of 1 to 3-story single-family houses built on large lots far back from the street. The area's low density distinguishes it from the larger surrounding residential context. Although the estate area exhibits a wide range of architectural styles and features, the area reflects a unique pattern of development and sitting. The prominent architectural materials within the area include wood, brick, and stucco. Common architectural styles include Queen Anne shingle, Tudor Revival, and Colonial Revival, and that's from the historic preservation element of the master plan. And I believe the preservation consultant, Mr. Connolly has reviewed the plans and you've provided a report.
Yeah, I have. Yes.
And can you just give a brief introduction and then we'll turn it over to the applicant?
Would it be okay if I read through?
Sure.
Okay. So the application is for the demolition of 2 significant historic and contributing architectural resources within the estate resource area with the goal of consolidating the lots and construction of 1 new large dwelling. The subject properties 14 Undercliff Road and 172 Lloyd Road consist of 2 dwellings in the estate resource area. 14 Undercliff Road, I'm just going to skip around here, but basically 14 Undercliff Road was a fine example of the Tudor revival, and as part of any historic district would be a contributing resource. The same is true of the 172 Lloyd Road property, which was a fine example of the colonial revival. 172 Lloyd Road had the added distinction of having been designed by an architect. Both properties were identified in Montclair's historic sites inventory as having architectural significance and therefore were worthy of preservation. The demolition of these 2 residences removes the 2 contributing architectural resources viewed within the estate resource area, and their loss alone changes the character of the neighborhood. The loss of these 2 properties and the proposal to build 1 single property that far exceeds the scale of the existing residence sets a bad precedent. As such, the HPC should render a decision that the project does not comply with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation.
You said, before you said not comply, what was the?
Does not comply.
Before that, you made another statement. Far exceeds scale, and then there was a middle statement.
The loss of these 2 properties and the proposal to build a single property far exceeds the scale.
Right, and the next sentence.
And that this would set a bad precedent.
Bad precedent. I just want to make a note. Okay.
So setting that aside and just taking the project as the project. So the proposed single-family house is what was provided to us is difficult to assess the application because it's lacking critical information to make a cogent and fully informed evaluation. The following information should be provided to, by the applicant to the Board of Adjustments in consideration of the application. The applicant should show the proposed design in context of the street and the neighboring properties, including the relationship of not only the adjacent built forms, but also the natural landscape and topography. And the applicant needs to show in the design that the new construction will work architecturally within the context of the existing Queen Anne, shingle, Tudor Revival, and Colonial Revival style residences. And this is not to say that the design has to match any of these styles, but there needs to be an understanding of their scale, their articulation, massing, and that the new construction is not incongruent in the context of the neighborhood. I have just 2 more things. So the HBC should request the following conditions for any approval by the Board of Adjustment. The applicant is to return to the HBC for final review of all proposed materials and the detailing of those materials, including but not limited to siding, cladding, roofing, windows, chimneys, etc. The applicant should return to the HBC for final review of the design of material finishes of the proposed entrance gate. And the same should go for all the for the materials that have to do with the new retaining walls and visibility from the street.
Thank you. So, Mr. Tremblock, the purpose of the presentation before the HPC is just to give recommendations to the zoning board. They're the body that's going to give final approval for this application. So keeping Mr. Connolly's comments in mind, if you could just give us a brief presentation and address some of those comments.
Sure, I'm going to let Mr. Hickey do that. Of course, as everyone knows, the houses have already been demolished. They were demolished pursuant to building permits properly applied for and issued by the building department. And we're dealing with the house that's proposed to be constructed in place of those buildings that have been removed. And as you've already noted, the application before the zoning board with respect to the proposed house complies with all of the zoning requirements, except that we're seeking to position the house towards the rear of the property and triggers a single variance for the rear yard setback. Mr. Hickey We'll be happy to give you an overview and discuss his plans, and of course, answer any questions, address any concerns the commission may have. So I'm just going to turn it over to Tom.
Is there a better place for the pedestal, or this?
This is fine.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for allowing us to present the proposed design in its current state. I think we all know that the project is a very large and large house, and not common in this region or this area. And we want to respect the values and the charming town that you guys have developed here, or that you live in. One thing I'd like to just walk you quickly through how we developed this design. The site plan, as you can see, the reason that we're trying to have a variance is so we could tuck the house as far back away as possible and reduce the amount of exposure it has on the street. The reason that there's no context on this is because there's really no context other than the park behind it. So the house sits about 150 feet up from zero, and what we've done is we've positioned the driveway on the Lloyd side, and as you enter up, you start to see the main house. But anyway, this is the site plan, which is just a little bit more rendered than what you have. I come from, before I started grade, I was at Robert Stern Architects, where it was a very traditional firm, and we took historical context into serious consideration. So as we developed this estate, what we did was looked at references that we felt were relevant to our ambitions of creating something that was monumental. Referring to architects like Lindbergh, who had actually 2 houses in Montclair that I believe were demolished, ironically. But we started to look at some of the geometries of traditional architecture. And as you pointed out in your report, coincidentally, one from Montclair on Stonebridge has some of those Tudor-style references. So the elements that we drew from here, what we were trying to do is understand the taking traditional geometries, but then applying it in a modern context to accommodate our clients' modern lifestyle. What we felt with this also was that a lot of the older homes, which have the stone and the wood and the clapboard, or the strap work, felt while they were earth tones, they also were very dark, and we wanted something that was a little more inspiring and modern. So the references that we took was, actually when we were showing this to our clients, they were drawn to a house that I had done while I was at Robert Stern's office. Again, it has traditional values, but it's much lighter. It reflects a little bit more of a modern flair to it, even though, again, traditional values. So we took some of the references from another house that I had worked on, where we took gable ends, studied some other houses where we looked at limestone, and then the contrast of limestone with a black slate roof. And these are our intentions for the house that we're currently designing, is to have a slate roof, limestone facade, and fully custom windows. Along with the traditional details, we're going to be employing some modern details to, again, make the house feel fresh and not something that we're not rebuilding history. We're actually building a translation of history, something that's typically called transitional. Not a term I like, but seems to be the one that everyone does. So in determining what a transitional home looks like, we looked at one case study where a house in Minnesota took your classical geometries, exposed one facade with all the views, using glass and large expanses of aperture to really bring a modern flair to it. And one detail that they employed was to offset the glass stair hall so that it exposed an imbalance or a relaxed symmetry. Our house looks like this right now. Not right now, but currently. So from the street, like I said, this is towards the end of Lloyd Road. And what we've done is we've created a nice winding driveway. That we want, again, the reason we want to push the house back is so that we don't have a series of retaining walls with the front elevation of the house fully in front of both Lloyd and Undercliff. I think what this does is this marries seamlessly the architecture, the landscape, and the landscape design to create a house that looks as understated as one can be at the scale of this current house. To give you a broad elevation, this is a view that no one will ever have unless they're hovering with a hovering about 150 feet up in the air. But the main elevation is in between these two gables, and then the side wings are set back to give the impression of a smaller house. So what we're trying to do is manage the geometries, creating a simple gesture on the site, reducing the amount of detail so it doesn't become overly ornate, and then really just using a lot of glass so that our client can have full exposure to the city skyline, which is ultimately why he bought the site. A detail of the house shows that we're respectful of the traditional values, but then we use, and we're starting to add some detail that are clean and streamlined to give it more of a modern context. This is where we are so far. This is how we'd like to continue developing the house, so that, again, being respectful of the town's architecture.
I'm sorry, Miss. What materials were you looking at again?
So we're looking at slate roof.
Okay.
It's a limestone facade. Currently, we're looking at either bronze or steel windows, and then these infill panels would be either bronze or steel, whatever material we use for the windows.
Now, in terms of its setback towards the rear of the property, have you been up in the Eagle Rock Reservation area and
Yes.
assessed the views from there onto the site?
I have been up at Eagle Rock to look down, and the house would sit well below the viewing platform.
Oh, yeah, I understand from the viewing platform, but from the roadway that snakes up, that's frequented by
Well,
motorists,
the
bikers,
previous house
runners.
was in a similar location.
Yes.
So it's the same condition.
Yes, but the previous house was much smaller. But just in terms of screening or other measures to minimize the impact, because 6-7 months out of the year, when it's not full foliage, you can see directly in there. But is that something that you've considered?
No, I have not.
Any other
I
questions?
have questions. A few just dimensional questions.
Sure.
When they have required principal and accessory structure front yard line here, it doesn't have a dimension on it. Is that established in some way? Do we have, is there a survey of adjacent properties in order to develop that? Go to the site plan, please.
So it's on there's a zoning chart on the first page. And the calculation for the required front yard setback is shown. They show the existing of 149 and then the proposed with the lots itself.
There's a few other lines on here. There's a proposed principal structure, front yard, dashed with a line. Which I understand where it hits in front. Where does it hit from the back there? It hits the building. One of your variances is 25.8.
Right.
But I don't see the building going to that point. So what is that? What's that represent?
There's an underground garage.
Right.
The garage is built into the hillside, and that's the corner where the garage is located underground.
Is that the motor
Okay,
for?
one more question. Got it.
Sorry if I may be.
Here it says 119 rear yard required, but I see on the written
Yeah,
that's 141. in your little synopsis. I don't know if it's the same.
Yeah, the required rear yard, I used the zoning chart on the first page again. It says that the required rear yard as calculated
And it says that here.
is 141.
So what is this 119 required line on your column one?
So that would be the rear yard, the as of right.
As of right.
No,
We're
it's
diagramming
141.
what's required versus what we're proposing. That's what we
Excuse
want
me.
to design.
Can I swear you in, please?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. First,
Would you raise your right hand?
Yes.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're going to give this commission is the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Could you please state your name and your affiliation?
My name is Elisa Coran. I'm a senior project manager for Great Architecture.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but
I'm sorry.
I'm not understanding. So, I see 119 required.
Correct. So
What does that mean?
That's the required rear
Rear
yard setback.
yard.
So,
But
to build on that, yeah, I have a question on that too. So, in the zoning chart though, it says under required rear yard, it's 30 feet or 30% of the lot depth. And it says equals 141 feet, 1 7/16 inches, measured center of lot frontage and rear lot line, which is consistent with our rear yard depth. Our lot depth measurement is from the center point of the front line to the center point of the rear line. And then 30% of that value, which, so there is a discrepancy in the numbers that you're presenting, so.
Okay. So we'll take a look.
Okay,
at it.
so
Yes.
just
So you're-
to keep going with that, just so I understand it.
Sure.
I mean,
So that should be 141.
I'll let you guys work out exactly what the number is, but it seems like it's closer to 100, it's another 20 feet or so that would be normally required. I'm just looking at the amount of building that's being thrown into what the required rear yard would ultimately be, just to get a better sense of that.
Of course.
Okay. Another question. The proposed principal structure front yard looks like, in order to be more compliant, again, if you're all compliant, you wouldn't be here, right? You wouldn't have to deal with any of our guidelines.
Well, we can be
It
compliant.
looks, what's that?
We can build this house
That's
as of
what I'm
right,
saying.
yeah.
Otherwise, right.
But I think it's better for the, everybody else to put this house as far back on the lot as possible.
Do you have have you created a landscape plan for this and compared the number, looking from above,
Mhm,
Google
right.
Maps, there's a lot of trees, right, where your entry drive and entry court is.
Right.
So I take what you just said with a little grain of salt. You're pushing it back, but you're completely exposing it at the same time, short of a site plan.
Right, we've engaged a landscape architect to design something.
So, but going back to my question, the principal structure front yard could be dragged 20 feet. You could take this whole thing and move it 20 feet forward, and you'd be, I guess, except for the underground parking. Okay. I think those were, actually, it was the rear yard setback number, I didn't understand.
Yeah, I believe it's the
Everything
141.
else now I understand, I guess. Those are my questions.
Mr. Greenbaum?
So I have a question first to ask Graham. Help me understand, what are the setback requirements for an accessory structure?
Accessory structures in this zone are 12, it's 12 feet from one side and 18 feet from the other side. And then a 10-foot rear yard.
Only 10 in the rear yard?
Mhm.
So, for example, like the tennis court will be 10 feet away from the property line?
Correct.
And okay. So that's interesting. All right. And then the next question I have is, I'd like to ask the architect, just to help me understand, what portions of the building, help me understand exactly, okay. The required structure rear yard is the dotted line, the hashed line, and it crosses into the house. So it really doesn't cross into the house. I'm not talking about the motor court, but the house itself, really until, what, around this point here?
This is what I was talking about.
No, I know, but, right. This is the line, let me make sure I understand this, Pam, can you help me? Is this, the line I'm looking at here, if I'm not mistaken, is this the line that's supposed to be the rear yard setback?
That's the line depicting the
line I was
required
sticking
rear
to.
yard, correct?
That's the standard, that would be compliant, anything.
Right.
And the only part of the,
Another 20 feet, though. They have it at 119.
it'd be 20 feet ahead of
That's what I was
this.
just talking about, 140.
Okay,
141.
so basically, the portion of the actual principal structure would only be, would be this section here?
Plus the underground parking.
Right, well, the underground parking, though,
Yeah.
just to understand, okay. Is the, it would be helpful to see an elevation of the underground parking. And
It's underground.
right, no, I understand that.
See, it's-
An elevation to understand, is there any, is it elevated in any way? I mean, underground, you could build it up and make it underground.
Well, we're yes.
Like,
actually,
is it
it's-
completely covered?
It's covered on the top, and then we're cutting into the ground to get, it's actually a car gallery.
Would it be a change of grade, of the existing grade?
There is a step down from the point of the roof to the motor court.
No, I understand that, because
Right.
this is the motor court you drive in, and then the
Right.
cars are held in
Underneath.
here.
Right.
What is the height of this facade?
It's approximately 12 feet,
12 feet. And then above that, it's just,
mountain.
okay. I think I would want to see an elevation of that as part of the application, personally. Understand, because that's a significant part of what's crossing into the rear yard. The next question I have, and this is a separate general question, I'm very familiar with this site from both sides. I hike along the back, and I happen to live close by. And one concern I would have is erosion based on the incline. I know there's a substantial number of trees, and they've been holding the earth, intact. What are the plans to handle erosion?
Well, that's twofold, actually. When we first were brought onto the project, we learned that a lot of the trees were actually not healthy. So they could blow over with any good storm, is what we were told from, to be quite honest, I can't remember who told us that. But I think with the way to improve that is our site walls would actually be sturdier than the trees that are currently there. And then if there are any further plantings, the roots of those would actually bind with the walls to create a better retention of the site than the current trees.
The walls you're referring to are these structures here.
Right.
Again, it would be very helpful in seeing the whole site. in
Sure,
situ to see elevations of that. How high are these walls?
Which walls? Sorry.
The walls in here in this kind of garden terraced area. I'm assuming this is.
Sort of drawn and-
Can I approach?
Can you pass that? Yeah.
Give you a better idea.
And also, is there a wall on the sidewalk? And what is the
Yes.
height of that wall?
There's currently an existing wall, which we don't imagine that we'll be fixing or adjusting it anyway.
So you're going to retain the existing wall?
Right, just repair it. So the wall that you're talking about is these, or these.
Yes.
And the first step here is this one right here that you're seeing?
Yeah.
That's, I believe that's 6 feet, and then 4 feet in, and another 4 feet
So it'll be a total of 10 feet.
approximately.
Okay, so they're not gargantuan walls.
That's why we're trying to push the house back. Weighing the pros and cons, this is we think the better solution, so that otherwise this house is going to be sitting out here, and you're going to have a huge retaining wall, or many retaining walls.
If you were to mitigate the need for a rear yard setback variance,
Right.
do you have a strategy in mind?
Yeah, actually the house would appear, where you can see here how the house, again, relative, but the house appears smaller because this whole wing is tucked back.
Mhm.
For us to meet as a right, this would then move forward, and the whole house would move forward, and then the house would span the whole width. In other words, the view of the house would just be this huge elevation.
Well, you're saying by stepping this back, this distance here, you're mitigating its bulk massing.
Right, and you can see it's evident there that you don't see
Well, that's
this whole
from that
portion.
perspective, but,
And that would be from Lloyd.
right.
And then from Undercliff, you really wouldn't see the house because, again, it's stepped back so far that you'd just be looking up the hill.
And, all right, I might have more questions. I'm not sure if I'll get another bite at the apple, but go ahead.
Mr. Levy?
Anybody else?
Mr. Rooney?
The section of the house that sits farther back, I understand you don't want to bring the whole house forward because of the height, the retaining walls and things, but can the building be articulated? Can it make a curve instead of a straight line and keep it in the setbacks?
Of course, we could do a curved house.
Well, I don't mean curved, but it could be bent, or it could be...
We could. It's just, that was not my desire to.
Yeah, it doesn't really look like it's set up for the site. It looks like a straight line. And maybe there's something that could make it more interesting. Hopefully we won't be able to see it from the street much, but...
That's my goal.
Okay.
Well,
Any other questions, Mr. Rooney?
No.
Any questions or comments? Well,
comments,
yes, I'm going to open up the floor to comments. Mr. Ryman's? Well, actually, first, before I do, are there any objections to the recommendations that Mr. Connolly proposed? Any revisions to those comments?
Well, the only thing I would suggest, the comments that were made by Mr. Connolly pertain to the architectural style, issues of bulk and volume. What I would add to that, and I don't know if it's something we'll bring up in our discussion, is the impact on the reservation and those who actively use the reservation for recreation and et cetera. So
But just limited to, we'll go over all those issues, but just limited to Mr. Connolly's comments, so we can
in
just
terms of
table
adding
those.
or
In terms of these specific recommendations, is there anything else that needs to be modified, or are we comfortable
Well,
with
I think
including
the
that?
view from the street, from Lloyd Road and Undercliff, and maybe the reservation should be taken into account.
Understood.
I think we need to
Yeah.
know what that looks like.
and also from Snake Road, from
Yeah, going up to the reservation.
Yeah,
Understood. All right, Mr. Remnitz?
Comments?
Yes, comments.
Well, obviously the architect is very skilled.
Thank you.
Beautiful job. I'm not convinced that at 28 acres, you can't figure out how to build this house with your skill within the setbacks. That's a comment. I suspect it's really to gain view, not necessarily to get off of Lloyd Road. But,
Sorry to interrupt. Can you just make sure your microphone's on? I'm not really big.
I suspect it's to get the view, not necessarily hide from Lloyd Road. I guess my other comment would be in terms of materials. I think if you really want to hide from Lloyd Road, you would use some other natural materials that would blend more into the landscape as opposed to be in contrast with the landscape. I understand the intent, the design intent, but in terms, I would suggest that the materials should be darker and more natural. And those are my comments.
Mr. Greenbaum, comments for the board, or for the commission?
well, one thing is,
And
event-
recommendations.
yeah, well, but is this something that can be read? this was presented to Chair Bennett. She's not here. Should it be read for the record from a...
Graham, have you...
Who's it from?
Who's that from?
It's written from the Friends of Anderson Park, specifically Lizanne Renner, who's an active conservationist and resident of the town.
Graham, did you receive that?
I received an email.
Okay. Was it provided to the applicant?
It's not. Yeah.
Ira? What are you-
I normally we don't read into the record comments from someone who's not here to testify and to give, answer questions. And I don't see any reason to change that policy here.
Is that a policy or is that in the bylaws?
I'm not sure it's in your bylaws, but it's part of the municipal land use law that evidence has to be presented in person. You can't accept letters in this situation. So it's the law, basically.
Can we incorporate into our comments information that was presented by the third party, but can we couch them in our own?
Your comments you can put anything you want in your comments that's relevant to the, to the application. So you can do that. It's just that reading letters into the record from people who aren't here, that's, as I say, the municipal land use law really addresses that issue.
Well,
So, Mr. Greenbaum, I'm not going to allow you to read it into the record. If there's something in there and you want to incorporate it into your findings, that's fine, but we're not going to read it into the record. It's not going to be of any evidential value.
Got it. So the first statement I would make is, I don't know how familiar you are with Montclair. You said you work with Mr. Robert Stern. In fact, Robert Stern did some work right across the way in Llewellyn Park. There's a home that was done by him. It was actually an addition done by him in the 1980s, very close by. I would encourage you to look at the site of the Montclair Kimberly Academy campus on Lloyd Road.
Which one? Oh, Lloyd Road?
On Lloyd Road, on the corner of Bloomfield Avenue
I'm very
and
familiar
Lloyd
with that.
Road, there's a high school. And that high school, architecturally, I think was very thoughtfully designed to address the topography and also to incorporate materials and tonality that really, I think, was very thoughtful and clever and elegant. So in the sense that you've created a beautiful home for your client, which I would concur, I would recommend that in consideration of the lot and the kind of promontory and the various curves and the shape, that you might wish to embrace that in a very beautiful way, as opposed to being so rectilinear, and maybe address the fluidity of the land. And still, you could still retain some traditional geometries. I'm not questioning that. But I think it would be very helpful to look at that site as a very well-executed solution with similar challenges. There has been an issue with the fact that this particular site backs up to the county reservation. And there is a trail called the Lenni Lenape Trail that travels very close to the edge, because as you can appreciate, those who are hiking on the trail want to partake of the view of New York from that site as well. And I actually frequent that trail, and I know quite many people who do. And I would try to be more sensitive to the impact you will have to that community. It's a public amenity. It's a very beautiful. It's actually up for registration as a historical site. So with regards to your issues of proximity to the rear yard, I would encourage you to be mindful and respectful of that, because it is a public, important public attraction. I can only speaking for myself on the record, I would say that I'm uncomfortable making any firm commitment or decision or advice to the planning board that would be positive at this point.
Zoning.
Or to zoning, I'm sorry, to the zoning board of adjustment, without seeing elevations from the western side, the view from the reservation, and ideally from a perspective of the height of that trail. So overall, I think the lack of elevations, so we can understand the general heights of the facade and the roof lines. Without that information, it's very difficult for us to be, it's very difficult for us to render a decision and advise to the best of our ability.
Jason, can I just ask you a question? Our advice today is it, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
it. It's,
so-
like I said, it's a recommendation to the
Right,
zoning board.
okay, got
They
it,
can impose
got
whatever
it,
conditions
got
they
it,
want.
okay,
And
so
as
that is-
Mr. Connolly pointed out, they can impose requirements that they come here to come back for finishes and materials and things like that when they get to that stage.
Can we request that?
Yeah, that's what Mr.
requesting.
Connolly recommended.
I'm in agreement with a lot of what's already been said and with Mr. Connolly's report. I just would like to register my sadness and disappointment about the demolition of the 2 historic houses. And the only thing that maybe something good will come of it in terms of Montclair adopting some sort of preservation, forcing us to act a little more swiftly in terms of designating additional historic districts.
You're absolutely right. I think that what Mr. Greenbaum was talking about, not necessarily elevations, but sections through the site. So we could see how the topography is and how you could see it from the street and how you could see it from the Lenape Trail and from the road, the Eagle Rock Road. It's a big, ambitious project, and it's going to be grand. I'm not too sure that as it's sitting right now is really in the context is a Montclair context. It seems to be more of Beverly Hills. But we look forward to see what you're doing later.
Right, so I'm in agreement with what my fellow commissioners have stated in terms of recommendations for the zoning board. I would like to incorporate the recommendations of Mr. Connolly, with the caveat that it would also include, with the first bullet point of information that should be provided to the zoning board, in addition to demonstrating the context from the street and the neighborhood, but also context from the reservation, from Crest Drive, which is the road that snakes up the hill, from the Lenny Lenape Trail as well. As Mr. Greenbaum said, you also should provide elevations from the rear and the side. I think that would be was it the west side?
The rear, facing the west side of the facade, yes.
Yeah, so that
should be on all 4 sides, really, with a perspective from the key points of sight lines.
Okay, so incorporating the architectural stylings of the Montclair Kimberly Academy as I guess design inspiration.
I don't know if you meant that.
I don't mean so much the design per se as it relates to the language, the vernacular of it, more so the way the building was informed and accommodative to the topography. Because I happen to think, to the credit of the owner of this property, it happens to be a magnificent piece of land and a very unusual, beautiful meadow up there. And I think to reflect that in the architecture and being sympathetic to it would be a better solution all around. Better, I believe, even for the,
So David, they would be incorporating the
curvature of the topography
of MK in the way that it
embraces the mountain.
Okay.
And maybe in tonality too.
Okay.
Tonality.
Then all right. Then I'm going to strike that.
Strike.
Okay, that's not something we can put in the recommendation.
Recommending.
It's
looking at
too
it. I think it
abstract.
just should be more responsive to
More
the
responsive to the
Okay.
topography and the,
Right.
and the plan.
Response. Okay, one additional comment in terms of the rear yard setback. I would also recommend that there would be consideration about appropriate landscaping and screening of the rear.
I think we should make it more general.
Mhm.
We need to see.
We need, yeah.
A landscape plan for the
Mhm,
project.
mhm.
We also want to say we want, ideally, for those who are traveling on the Lenny Lenape Trail, that they should not necessarily, the view of the home should in no way impose or interfere with the natural landscape, or the site, of, the natural
Mhm.
topography of, they shouldn't be looking at something that's obstructing the natural environment.
Okay. And then one final comment, which hasn't been brought up yet, was, typically when historic properties are demolished or removed, we impose a condition that the applicant photo archive the property. We didn't have an opportunity to do that because the house has been demolished, so I'm going to recommend the zoning board impose a condition that the applicant obtain whatever historic photographs, architectural drawings, whatever they had regarding those two properties that were demolished. And I believe it's the Montclair Public Library that collects
The
them.
library, also the history center?
And the History Center, yeah, so
And what would they do with them?
they would archive them.
So that which is already in the possession of the library and the history.
No, I'm saying the applicant, whatever research materials they have.
That are not presently in their hands. Okay.
They need to compile that and get it over to the library for archival purposes. Okay, so.
I also think it's important to put on the record that the side yard setback drawing, the plan, Exhibit A001, page 2, the side yard setback, if I understood my colleague correctly, is drawn inaccurately.
No, the rear yard.
The rear yard setback, and that the planning board, the zoning board of adjustment should be provided with an updated, and we should really be providing.
We're not going to hear.
Well, they should be. It should be on the record that this information is not accurate. This actually is potentially
I have two more comments. I think that's correct.
deceptive. They will be misguided if they relied upon this.
Okay.
I think the applicant needs to show hardship why they cannot work within the setbacks on 28 acres.
Well, I mean, that's what the zoning board has to
Zoning,
do.
okay.
Meaningful hardship.
Yeah, so.
Okay. And I think the material.
Yeah, I think there was a reference about materials, yeah.
By the way, just to correct the mistake, the property is only 6 acres, it's not 20 acres.
It's
Still a large property nonetheless.
pretty big lot around
Not
here.
less than 28 acres.
The square footage.
It's square footage,
The
yeah.
built structure, the total built structure is, what's the total square footage?
Depending on which calculations that you use, if you use AIA standards versus what a contractor's going to charge you, that's a big range.
Let's do both.
It's in the range of 60,000 square feet.
And does that include the garage? Or is that just the primary residence?
That includes the car gallery.
Car gallery?
What is a car gallery?
The client will be collecting, there are some cars that you collect, not necessarily drive as investments, but also just because you like cars.
We had one of those on our street before.
Okay, so moving on, because it's almost 9 o'clock, the recommendation to the planning board that I have would essentially be Mr. Connolly's comments, starting with the last sentence, of the first page. As such, the HPC should render a decision that the project does not comply with the standards for rehabilitation. So, as the preamble, the commission would find that that the demolition and the proposed project aren't in line with the standards for rehabilitation. That based on the presentation and the plans provided, the commission would not recommend the rear yard setback. And then moving on to the next, the second page, in terms of recommendations, Mr. Connolly's first bullet point, starting with the applicant, should show the proposed design, and then adding to that sentence
Context from the
context from
reservation,
Crest
as well as the
Drive.
trail.
Elevation and sections.
Let me finish,
Oh, yeah,
Mr.
sure.
Greenbaum. Lenny Lenape Trail. The next bullet point, incorporate that language. In addition to, the applicant should be more responsive to the topography. Add a third bullet, that the applicant should provide elevations from the rear and sides, plural. Excuse me, and sections. And then the HPC recommends the following conditions of any approval by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The first bullet point will incorporate that language. The second bullet point will incorporate that language. The third bullet point will incorporate that language. Add an additional bullet point requiring a full landscape plan. And then the last recommendation would be to obtain and compile historic photographs, architectural drawings, and any other materials for archival purposes of the two demolished structures, and provide them to the Montclair Library and what was the other organization?
History Center.
History Center. And that's it. Do I have a motion to accept those recommendations as part of our memorandum to the Zoning Board of Adjustment?
Yes.
I move that those recommendations be forwarded to the zoning board of adjustment.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Isn't there a second variance required for more than 4 cars on the lot? You're supposed to be restricted.
I can't say on top of my head. I do know that the zoning law does have something about that, but these are, well, I just don't know. Let's put it that way. I'd have to look. Graham, do you know?
Yes.
There is is there a request for that variance?
Yes.
Oh, there is. Okay.
The next application is a referral from the Planning Board, application 2606, 403-405 Bloomfield Avenue, Adaline Moster Property LLC. The site plan application is for construction of a 3rd floor addition to an existing 2-story mixed-use commercial residential building in the C1 Central Business Zone. It's a referral to the HPC because it's located in the Town Center Historic District. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Town Center Historic District. This property is on Bloomfield Ave. Let's see. Did you just mention?
So,
Now, a variance is required for surface parking to be set back at least 4 feet from the side and rear property lines. A 0-foot setback is proposed. A variance is required from zoning code 347-102A, which requires garages, parking spaces to be accessible from similarly paved areas, which must be connected directly or by means of similarly paved driveway to the public street. The parking layout proposes 2 rows of stacked parking spaces and requires a variance from this requirement. Graham, when you say stacked, is this like the tandem parking?
Yes, there's tandem
Okay.
parking
Yeah.
at the rear, correct.
It's not one on top of the other.
This property is identified in the Historic Resources Inventory as an early 20th century commercial structure. Important elements of the building include the decorative brick panels, corbelled brick spans, and granite-clad base. The second-story windows are 6/1 double hung. And there is mechanical equipment on top of the second floor. Graham, is that as proposed or current?
I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
To be candid, Janice did this review.
And Mr. Connolly, you prepared a report. Can you just give a brief summary of your findings and
Sure.
your recommendations for this application?
So the scope of the project is add a 3rd level to the existing 2-story structure to increase the floor area of the 2 existing apartments. And the proposed design is in keeping with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. The new addition is set back from the primary facade and will not be visible from Bloomfield Avenue. The 3rd story is not out of scale with the neighborhood, even though the addition is going to bring the building above the level of the 2 adjacent properties. But there are other buildings on the block of Bloomfield that are taller. The material choices, I think, for the addition, distinguish the addition from the other modifications. And the other modifications, nearly the rear yard deck and the stair. But these alterations are not incongruent with the existing architecture or the architecture of the adjacent properties. And my only comment had to do with the AC units on the roof towards the front of the addition. So I was wondering if those could either be located or rotated, which would bring them closer to the center of the highest point of the parapet and further away from the sides of the building. And that's really
Thank you.
But I thought it was
Yep.
a nice addition.
And just for context, as I mentioned, this is just a referral from the planning board. They're going to make the ultimate decision. We're going to provide them with our recommendations. And I just have one quick question before you begin your presentation. It's for Graham. The site, I guess where the parking is, that's, I guess, accessed from the municipal lot?
That's
going to
correct.
be a new parking deck, correct? And my question for the applicant and the experts when you go through your presentation is what considerations that have you made for the fact that eventually that'll be a parking deck that you'll have to contend with?
I think they probably worried a lot. Who's going to testify?
The architect is going to testify.
Great. Could you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're going to give this commission is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Could you please state your name and your affiliation, please?
Nino Spalacci. I work with the Architect Studio, architectural firm that prepared the drawings, and I'm one of the architectural designers that worked on the project.
Thanks so much.
And counsel, your name for the record?
Gerald Kelly. I'm representing the applicant. My office is in Denville, New Jersey.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Well, as you know, we've got this two-story building, 2 commercial spaces on the first floor, and 2 existing apartments on the second floor. The proposed design is to increase the 2 residential units, by providing a 3rd-story addition, which will accommodate a master bedroom, recreation area, and and bathroom and closet, and also terraces from each of the two apartments. They're side by side, and also a balcony in the back. The addition will be set back from the facade 28.5 feet, and the terrace is 18.5 feet. Thank you for the recommendation by the Commission. We will be happy to rotate the condenser units. That is a good recommendation. I know there was we actually, from the original submission, we lowered the addition by the so that helped with the height. There we prepared on drawing page 100, sort of a street elevation for Bloomfield Avenue. We were across the street, someone maybe 6 feet tall. You would see, the addition somewhat, but not distracting. And the renderer provides us with some renderings, which I think here. And actually, since Mr. Janitza here, our client, came to us, and what he wanted was a design. I'm sure you're familiar with the building on Walnut and Fars, and that was his motivation for wanting to develop the project in the style he was looking for. So we drove around the area and looked at some of the ways that architecture is evolving in the area, and we found that what he was asking didn't seem out of line. So it was in keeping with the environment, present environment as far as the architecture. And we had a renderer provide us with some renderings. The original submission did not include the 2 storefronts. We would like to go ahead, our client would like to also renovate the storefronts. So new storefront. The existing storefronts have a center entrance with display windows on each side. We wanted to kind of make better use of the interior space, so the new storefront will just have a door on one side and with a larger storefront, which on the interior would make better use of the space. As far as materials,
Mr. Spilacci, can you pass the renderings around just so we get a closer view? Thank you.
The front and the back of the building presently are, well, you have the board, painted white, and our proposal is to paint it, this is a gray, Benjamin Moore gray, and with some of the details for the window header and banding, just a lighter gray color. That's for the existing portion of the building. This is just a sample of the storefront material, just a matte black. And for the addition, then we were proposing, these are some more maintenance-free cementitious products, siding. So I've got the Ecotone. I'll just be provided in this fashion. Speaking to the issue about the parking garage, we were told that the proposed garage will allow access to our parking spaces.
That's correct.
So we do have 4 parking spaces, 2 on each side stacked. Making provisions for garbage and recycling. And it's an existing paved area right now, so.
Yeah, just to expound upon that, the applicant was provided a copy of the proposed parking garage construction plans to review placement of their parking, and access will be maintained as part of the new construction to the rear parking area.
Okay. Can you just describe how that access is going to be achieved through the rear parking? Are you going to
There's
go
no
through?
wall in the parking garage, so you
There's
Oh,
an opening.
So you're just going to
Yes.
drive through the garage to get to the spots. Okay.
Mhm.
Those 4 spots, the 2 tandems, they're strictly for the 2 residential units. So,
correct.
but
Yeah, I mean, one for each for the residential
oh,
units,
okay, and then one for the commercial.
For each of the commercial spaces.
Oh, okay. All right. So there will have to be some coordination between the different unit owners or renters.
There'll be 310 spots in the deck. Actually, 315.
When are they breaking ground on the deck?
Completion date scheduled for August 31st, 2020. It'll be a little tough to make that because we can't start until the deck on South Willow is done. If they don't want to close both lots at the same time.
Okay. Is that it? Any questions? Mr. Rooney? Mr. Rooney, do you have any questions?
I think that the changes to the storefront and to the front of the building have to come back with more detail. I don't have any problems with the size and scale of the third floor addition. And everything, you know, is pretty handsome and...
Yeah. Steve, just questions for now?
Yeah. Okay, no question.
What is that material?
This is for the siding for the addition. So this is part of it. No, it's just next to each other. Different columns.
That's the Equitone.
Any other questions, Caroline?
The rooftop addition, does it have a parapet wall, or is there going to be a railing above it, or you need some sort of code compliant
So the
railing or
actual
parapet?
addition above the
Extrusion.
roof area will have a small parapet just to direct rainwater to the scuppers.
But there's no, like, code requirement if someone tries to access it that there's a railing? On the top, on the very top?
On the very top.
here?
Yes. No?
The rear facade we're talking about, right?
Well, no, I'm talking about the front facade because it would affect really what you would see from Bloomfield Avenue if, you know, you decide or code requires that there's something be up there. So,
There's nothing that the code
okay.
and there's no access to that area. There's no stair, no hatch or anything, so it's just a flat roof. It actually has a kitchen for the water.
But around the terrace portion, there is a rail, correct?
Correct.
So
there's a
42-inch
rail.
high railing all around, and also for the top.
And then also, I did notice on your drawings and renderings that you're replacing the windows at the second story with a single pane casement window. Okay. I don't know. I think that's problematic, and I think you should retain the double hung windows in the 6/1 configuration.
Sure.
Mr. Rebo?
I concur with my colleagues.
Any
and-
question?
Oh, no, not at the time.
Mr. Remnitz?
Questions. Okay, questions are the right side elevation and the left side elevation. You really can't see the right-hand side elevation and the left-hand. I mean, there's buildings on either side. So what am I reading when I'm looking at these drawings?
Well, there's area that's exposed. You've got one-story building on one side, so
It would
But
be
that-
good. It would be good somehow
to
that-
delineate that.
to delineate that,
Okay.
because we don't really see these. In fact, one elevation, there's a building next door that I don't
Completely,
think
yeah.
you can see the elevation. So it probably would be a good idea to show that you can't really see it
See it.
somehow. You have one you make a comment on question. Exists on the one elevation. Existing brick facade to be repainted. Now, when I look at this photograph, it looks to me like one of these, either right side or I don't know which left side. I guess that's
That would be your right side, correct?
Yeah, is not painted now.
Correct.
So it's not being repainted, it's being painted, right? This says existing brick wall to be repainted. It's not painted now.
Correct.
So it's not
You repainted it.
You're proposing to paint it.
Yeah, the
Okay.
front and the back.
So that's the question. And you are also you're proposing to replace the double hung windows on this Bloomfield Street elevation with casement windows. Is that correct?
Yes. But we can accommodate the...
One other question. Oh, was that in Tom's?
I brought it up.
Oh, you brought it up. Is the intent where there is, because of the materials you're using, is cementitious, that cementitious material looks very similar in color to the way the brick is now painted on the front facade? Is that, in the photograph I have, it's somewhat of a gray, green foot color? This is cementitious. Is the idea to keep this color?
That's going to be painted.
Same color?
This color, gray. I mentioned it, but...
Oh, so you're going to do darker...
Dark gray in the front and the back. And then
with
the
the lighter on top?
On top.
Okay. And then the other wood paneling is in the back?
Well,
they will... in the recess of the front?
Exactly. So both front and back will be treated with these materials.
Got it.
The different volumes.
I got it. I don't have any other questions.
We have comments?
Yeah, let's open up the floor for deliberations and comments. Actually, Mr. Connolly, did you have any questions or comments?
I do, actually. I think the storefront is an issue because that wasn't part of the application that I reviewed, so I think that needs to be addressed. And I do have an issue with painting brick that hasn't been previously painted.
And we can keep that existing brick as is, because we did actually find some, because the sides of the addition will be a brick, so we can follow that brick up. So we have options to just keep that unpainted. We'll use a thin brick for the sides. So we can use that brick.
Mr. Rooney?
In your renderings, I see the stairway in the rear has been moved to the side.
Correct.
And it's not on the plan. Do you think so? Okay, we'll take it.
Page A100, 110.
110. Okay, yeah. I must have been just looking at the existing. What else? Yeah, the storefront, like I said, have to make a separate submission with that because we have no details on it. And the windows should stay the same configuration as they are now. Anything else? Can't think of anything else. No.
Also, if we're looking at, we'll be seeing the storefronts, I guess, again, with details and sections and profiles. And I would also like to look at the awnings more closely, that they conform to what a traditional historic awning would be with a loose skirt. And
Yeah, so one of my draft conditions that I have for you all is that the applicant is to return to the HPC for final review of all storefront detailing and installation awnings, or awning installation details.
David?
I concur.
I think you did a great job. When I first saw this run across my desk, a third-story addition on 2 floors on Bloomfield Avenue, I was expecting the worst. I'm glad it's set back. I appreciate you did the sightline diagram. It seems like something you would naturally do in New York or Newark, but we don't see here. People don't take the effort to really show us what you see. Rotating the mechanical unit, I think, will help because I think the peak of that front facade is what's really blocking that in the center, not really that much on either side. I think the windows should be 6/1 double hung to match the historic window. The original, it's unclear. One side is 1/1, the other side is 6/1.
Well, in the historic inventory, it's mentioned actually.
Is it?
It is. That number 6/1.
6/1.
And there's a photo of the 6/1 windows.
I would comment that maybe 6/1. That I think is a great job.
Thank you. So, in terms of our recommendation to the planning board,
I'm sorry, can I say one more
Sure.
thing? This is an example, I think, and I don't know where we go with the HPC. Because this is a site plan review, our role as the HPC is no longer a certificate of appropriateness or being able to really comment on, control it in any way. We can only be advisory. So I don't know, just not here, but looking into the future, how some of these minor site plan applications, which I don't know what's the difference between major and minor, but this seems about as minor as it can be.
It's technically a major.
It's a major.
It's a major?
It's an addition.
Minor, major.
Minor is like a sign.
Okay, well, see, that's what we're reduced
Yeah.
to, unfortunately.
And I think we
That's
should,
my comment.
I agree, I think
That's
we
my
should consider
comment.
looking into the ordinance to changing that so that we do have an ultimate decision on buildings within historic districts that are designated.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, once, no, we don't have to get
Well, yeah,
into
well,
Right, it's not for now, it's just.
All right. Yeah, so in
But
terms
as
of
part of-
this application and the recommendation to the board, the preamble, I think should state that the commission recommends approval of the site plan with the following conditions. Also in the preamble, note that the commission commends the placement of the third floor addition being set back and being sensitive to the streetscape of Bloomfield Ave and views from Bloomfield Ave.
It complies with the
It
site.
complies, yeah. And then in terms of recommended conditions, that the
I have the four
applicant-
listed if you wanted me to read through them.
Oh, yeah, if you have it
Yeah,
listed,
I have.
then.
Okay, so the first is that the applicant is to return to the Historic Preservation Commission for final review and detailing of the storefront installation and installation of the awnings. The applicant is to retain the configuration of the second floor windows as 6/1 double hung on the second floor. Any and all, third one is any and all previously unpainted brick surfaces should remain unpainted. The fourth is that the mechanical equipment on the roof should be rotated 90 degrees to better be screened by the parapet wall. And then a fifth condition I was going to suggest would be that the applicant return for final selection and review of finishes and materials.
Yeah. Do I
The
have
storefront.
to the storefront?
The storefront was the first condition.
Yeah. Do I have a motion to approve those recommendations?
Motion to approve.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We're off the record.
Okay, we're back on the record.
All right, back on the record. We've completed new business. We are tabling our 2019 goals and objectives. It's being carried to the next meeting. Demolition ordinance, Graham, was that circulated?
We're going to have Mr. Karasik comment.
The answer to the question is no.
Okay.
Because let me tell you what we're doing. I just actually drafted it based on an awful lot of comments from a lot of people. Strong, quite a lot of interest. But in any case, what we can do, there's things we can do and we cannot do. And there are two situations. Situation number one is a situation where there is no development application to the zoning board or planning board. That's when you can exercise your certificate of appropriateness powers, and that's when you actually can have the most influence or most authority to deal with a proposed demolition application. So we can have all demolition applications sent here. They would be made presumably to the construction code official, and then they would be sent here, and they would have to be evaluated by this board. If this board approved the application, which, if a place is falling down, it doesn't have historical significance, but it's still within the group of buildings, and I'll talk about that in a minute, which triggers review, then you can approve it. If you don't approve it, then there's a process, which is the process that used to be in effect, pretty much, in which you have to look for alternative solutions, look for buyers, et cetera, et cetera. And if there's if an owner has gone through all of that, they can still demolish it a year or so later, or 8 or 12 months later, because apparently, from what I can see, and I've looked at laws in a lot of different towns, and Princeton, and as an example, but there have been a lot. We don't have the authority to prevent a person from demolishing their house, period. We can make it difficult, we can put them through the ringer, but we don't have the authority to prevent it in the end. And every ordinance that I've seen really prefaces with that remark that said, with the statement that in the end the owner can demolish the house if they've followed all of these procedures. So essentially, what we want to do is, instead of just having those procedures for houses that are designated local landmarks or in designated local historic districts, which is now the only group of properties which would be subject to that kind of review, we're going to open it up to all of the properties that are essentially listed in one way or another in the historic preservation element. That's about 4,900 properties, about half the town, which fit in those categories. Those are potential historic districts, state historic districts, local historic districts, local designation, state and federal designation, plus all of these potential districts. So all that group comes in to play and would require a certificate of appropriateness to demolish. And if you denied it, they would have to go through those procedures that I just described. The problem with the whole idea of a demolition ordinance, a demolition review ordinance, is the other applications, which are probably most of them, because most people aren't going to be demolishing something without building something. And those applications end up going to either zoning board or planning board. Usually the zoning board, since the planning board doesn't have jurisdiction over single-family or two-family houses. In those applications, all we can do is have an advisory role, just like, what are you shaking your head? You don't agree, or you're complaining? I don't like it. I'm just telling you that this is the situation. And right now, every application, pretty much all of the any application that meets that broad criteria comes here already. Because of the way our ordinance is worded, everything that's identified in one form or another in the historic preservation element of the master plan has to be reviewed by the HPC. But if there's a planning or zoning board application, that review is advisory. And unfortunately, the only thing I could do, or I found I could do, obviously, we're going to propose an ordinance. There's a lot of people who are going to want to give input and comment. And the council hasn't even seen this. So the council doesn't have a fixed idea, except that they are upset in the same way other people are, for the most part, by these. I can't speak for them, but some people are upset about the demolition. So what it can do in those cases is at least increase the checklist so that they have to, if there's an application for development to build something, which involves the demolition of a property that's on that list, those 4,500 or so properties, they have to submit that whole list of items which they would have to submit if you were reviewing it for certificate of appropriateness. There's a list that's in D138 D7, I think, in the ordinance. So we've increased the checklist, and I know I've heard before at this board that they would like to see more of the historic preservation items added to the checklist.
I just want to interject. That was the previous ordinance, I believe.
The previous ordinance identified the difference between the previous ordinance and this is the previous ordinance identified all properties 75 years or older as those that required this review.
Right.
And we're taking the more, a more defensible approach, which is all properties that have been identified one way or another as historic in this
I think that's
in the master plan element. And Graham has prepared a list of all those properties. So we actually have a list somebody can consult to see whether that property is on that list.
Does that include the potential designation?
Yes.
Okay, so here there was a
I don't know what you gave me or something.
The HPC had the right to deny a certificate of appropriateness as it relates to demolition.
Correct.
And there were specific. I know you're saying that this is what you're putting back, but this is the actual previous.
No, I'm not putting back. It's already there. What we're doing is
present.
increasing with respect to the certificate of appropriateness and that whole process. We're just increasing the number of properties that have to go through it if they try to demolish
If
them.
this was already there, how are those two houses demolished if we didn't? Why didn't this go into effect?
Those provisions are only applicable to local landmark properties that are when we do a nomination report, we have the owner come.
So can these exact same requirements be applicable to anything?
That's what Mr.
So I wanna make
Krasik
sure,
is saying.
So all you're doing is instead of having this language be applied to previously the ones that were just registered, you're expanding it to include anything that's within any of these
That's
districts, et
correct.
cetera.
And that's with respect to an application for a demolition permit where there's no development. And as I
There's no
said,
development.
I can't imagine that's going to be too common.
But so wait, what happens, so in this case, these two homes had that application come in prior to the modification after the modification you're proposing, would that have impact on that application?
If they hadn't filed with the zoning board with the Board of Adjustment, you see, those two houses were in that broad list.
Right.
So those two houses would trigger review by the HPC. And if there was no development application, then you would have the power, you would have the power to issue or deny a certificate of appropriateness, and if you denied it, there would be the various procedures that you gave me. The problem isn't really that. That's the easy one. The hard one is how to try to stop demolitions in situations where there are development applications, since I believe that's most of them.
Well, wait, but there is a development application for the new house.
Well, that's right. That's why I said.
But also,
I said if these.
But also, that wasn't really a designated historic site. It was just a proposed. So
No,
if,
but
if they weren't going before the zoning board, if it was just an as-of-right application, we wouldn't hear it on the demo because
That's
What he's saying is under the new ordinance.
under the new ordinance you would. Okay.
if they don't go, but again, you have very limited powers. I mean, not you, the township
But
has
why,
very
why
limited
can't
powers.
why can't the zoning board apply those standards?
Well, the zoning board is, in fact, if you look at the HPC ordinance, it says that those standards are applied. Well, certain review standards are applied by all the boards, and they do apply. They can apply those standards. The problem, there's a couple of problems, as far as the zoning board and the planning board. Both of them are under a certain time constraints. They can't push it out as far as you can. On a certificate of appropriateness, you can push it way out, time-wise, by putting them through these appeal procedures. The Board of Adjustment and the Planning Board have to run according to their 180 days or 190, whatever, depending on the application. And the variances involved, there are different time frames. So they will and can apply the standards, and they can say, if they want, if there's an application for variances, they can say, we don't want to grant the variance, not in the public interest, because we don't want to see this house torn down. That's in their.
That would have been potentially a factor in this application.
And you can make, well, I'm not sure about this one because it's torn down already.
No,
That's
I
a whole
meant
other.
Yeah,
prior.
that's the thing. They got permits
Exactly.
without having to go before us or the board.
Correct, and they're because it wasn't on the list of properties that that would require a certificate of appropriateness. And I did review their file. They did everything legally and correctly.
Okay.
Can I just jump in?
You
So-
turn
Yes.
your mic off, I think.
But as far as the HPC is concerned, if there's a site plan application that includes demolition of some, our role is only advisory
Correct.
anyway. So we're pretty much, unless we can change the ordinance in such a way that any historic property needs, site plan or not, needs a certificate of appropriateness.
Well, the problem is we're up against the state law now. I mean, it's the state law that's where the limitations are coming from, not from the local. Yeah, we can't, that ordinance doesn't fly.
But in the past, there was a requirement that the HPC had oversight over demolition of historic properties.
Not exactly.
Can I ask another question?
Confused.
Can I ask another question? Are there any landmarks in Montclair that are protected if someone wants to come in and develop?
There's no, as I understand it, there's no landmark that can't be torn down eventually.
Can't be torn down.
Eventually.
Can
Is
Mr.
that your
Connolly maybe
understanding, Graham?
answer, how does Glen Ridge do it?
They do not have a provision for demolition.
What does that mean?
Turn your microphone up, Tony.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What does that mean?
They have nothing written in their ordinance about demolition.
So what happens if somebody wants to demolish a property? They just do it?
They're shunned. It's a small town.
Yeah.
No. I mean, that was a joke, but what's real?
No, seriously,
someone knock it
I've been
down?
looking into a number of towns that have them. The only ones that I've been able to find were Lambertville. Plainfield has a good one.
Can you share?
But they don't give them the powers that you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, you could still demolish. We could just delay it.
Right, well, the basic idea is to create impediments and dissuade them from
Right.
doing so.
Yep.
Can we put that into place here where the HPC could trigger those impediments?
We can't trigger impediments. You can make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment or the plan. We're talking about now the development applications, not ones where there's just demolition. You can make recommendations to Board of Adjustment and to the Planning Board and ask that certain things be done. It depends on how sympathetic those boards are to your historic preservation concerns.
What if we ask that any application for development in a historic zone in general should come to the HPC for review and a certificate of appropriateness, and that would include demolition?
The review is fine. It's a certificate of appropriateness that doesn't good. You don't have authority to issue certificates of appropriateness if there's an application to the Board of Adjustment or the Planning Board. Those boards then take jurisdiction.
I understand.
And what you have is advisory.
That's fine, but if there was an understanding that upon review by the HPC and these other two bodies who have the ultimate authority to make the decision would be deferential, and that would ultimately result in triggering these impediments, is there a way to codify that?
No, because the municipal land use law doesn't let us place sort of as you use the word impediments, but it's exactly what we can't do. Is we can't impede the process that's been established for the Planning Board and Zoning Board to do their work.
Can you just clarify one thing? I know that the municipal land use law requires that there's only one governing body that makes the ultimate decision, but does it specify that it has to be the Planning Board or the Zoning Board or the HPC, or could it be just one, and could it be the HPC?
No, each board has, there's some overlapping jurisdictions between the Planning Board and the Zoning Board, but the HPC has very limited jurisdiction in the municipal land use law, so you can't just decide how you're going to parcel up the jurisdiction. That's already been decided by the municipal land use law.
Oh, wait, but in the past, the HPC did have authority on making binding decisions on certain matters, and that
certificates of appropriation. I'm sorry, appropriateness.
No, but okay. So here's the situation. Apparently, our certificate of appropriation has been removed. No, I meant appropriation.
It's not.
We were
removed.
denied. It was taken from the HPC at some point. There was never a modification to the HPC's authority?
Not since I've known it.
Not in 2012, there was a change?
No, in 2012,
This board has we issued about 60 certificates of appropriateness last year. They're all posted on our website.
No, I understand,
We
but
did one for 18-30 South Fullerton, which we're meeting tomorrow on.
Wasn't
So
there
we've
another-
approved
The-
them.
You're talking.
The
I think
site
you're talking about the
plans,
no
though.
knockdowns.
Site plans are only permitted to be
No,
approved by
no.
the planning board.
apparently at one time...
That jurisdiction, as Ira said, is set up in the municipal land use law. The only boards that have jurisdiction over site plan applications are the planning board and the zoning board, in accordance with the municipal land use law.
This board had, when it was a 75-year-old house demolition rule, it's still, in the end, the Marble Inn was demolished, for example. But in the end, the buildings could still be demolished. So even then, there wasn't the power to go forward. And that was taken out because it wouldn't have, apparently, I wasn't involved, wouldn't have
This is
sustained.
live? This actual document is live? There's been no modification?
What section?
The one I gave to Ira.
If this came out of off our website, or...
Yeah, I have it right
then
here.
this is our-
347-140, grant or
Yeah.
denial of certificates of
But
appropriateness.
there's a section of it on the bottom.
Section C, denial and applications for demolition.
What about alternative
Upside
to
down.
demolition?
Yes,
That's one of
that's the current ordinance.
That's part of the procedure. They have to look at alternatives to demolition.
But that, when we were giving our recommendations for Lackawanna, that's literally the criteria we spelled
Yeah.
out.
These specific sections were referenced in the Lackawanna Plaza memo.
Okay, all right. I mean, you guys are the attorneys.
So the only difference it really is for just demolition. It doesn't apply to anything that has site plan review. There it goes back to zoning, and we have to depend on zoning and planning to care about historic preservation. If they don't,
I mean, if there was any way to increase, to put the teeth into that, I'd be happy to do it. I couldn't.
Tom, do you have any
find it.
ideas?
No, well, I think we should modify, maybe add a few more impediments to.
Well, you can make some.
But that's only for, that's for demolition,
Yeah,
not for site
but-
plan.
Yes.
Do you know of any situations where it's a new development or something, you know?
No.
I mean, you have to remember that, I mean, it sounds like callous, but this is America, and the whole system
No, I
is
get it.
No,
set up.
no, this is
let me
New
finish.
Jersey,
No,
because in New York,
in-
it's completely
But
different.
the whole
I know, it's
system,
in New
right
York.
now, the system is set up to protect private property rights. So
Right.
that's what we're fighting against, is not just Montclair ordinance, but state and constitutional issues.
Right. We control what you can build to some extent. You don't control what you can tear down.
Well, that's not true. In New York, there is a very, very strong hardship requirement, and it's specific, and it requires that, and it's shown here,
I know,
that
I've
the
seen it.
applicant has to provide documentation of all their finances
Yeah, I
to
think we should just make
explain-
that a little stronger, make
Yes.
them go through a few more hoops in order to get.
And show us the money. Show us that they can't do anything with the existing house.
Right, but those requirements are, yes, we could do that with respect to the appeal process if you deny a demolition certificate in a situation where it's not an application to the planning or zoning board, not a development application.
But we should always deny demolition because it's against the standards.
I understand that,
Right.
but beyond that, those strict kind of financial things wouldn't be applicable to a scenario where there's a development application.
Well, what about if they're written into the bylaws of the Montclair Board of Adjustment and the Montclair Planning Board, language that would do something, that would allow us a little extra filter? Could that be
Because
done? In the bylaws?
I don't think so. I read the memo by the planning board attorney with respect to this, and it was quite negative. It was more negative in terms of what authority they had to get into, as he used the word, impede.
What about in the master plan? Could there be language in the master plan that says, so that any adjudicating body would say, our master plan specifically restricts demolition unless blah, 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 blah is met?
The master plan doesn't issue orders like that in a way. It's a master plan is a planning document. It's not an ordinance or a law per se. You could say what it already does say, which is historic buildings are important and the preservation is important. And I mean, we have an awful lot of language in our historic preservation element.
But in terms
about
of
protecting historic resources.
That's on the backside of that.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
think
In
we
terms
have
of
all
the-
the all of section.
But I think that in terms of the, I mean, it's, the issue's twofold. We just need to expand the scope of what properties come under review, but we can't limit it to just our board. It has to be the zoning board and the planning board that we have to eventually defer to. And we have to just make the demolition criteria more objectively stringent, so that they have to apply those factors.
Well, they
in a
already
real
are
way.
supposed to review demolitions using the factors that are in our ordinance. The factors are pretty detailed, as far as I can see. And maybe there's some room for
like
tightening.
Caroline was
There
saying,
might be room
show
for tightening them
financial-
up.
show
I'm
financial
on your side on this in terms of, yeah, if there's room to tighten them up, fine. But there's a limit to how
I just want to.
forcefully you can apply those.
I just want to note the financial requirement is already in the existing ordinance. It's under subsection 2. It says, "Commission shall be empowered to negotiate with the applicant to see if an alternative to demolition can be found, and may require the applicant to prepare a financial analysis which may include any or all of the following: amount paid for the property, date of purchase, assessed value of the land and improvements thereon according to the most recent assessment. For depreciable properties, a pro forma financial statement prepared by an accountant or broker of record, all appraisals obtained by the owner in connection, bona fide offers for property owners for sale, any consideration given by the owner as profitable, adaptive for uses."
But that,
Okay,
that
why
doesn't-
wasn't that used in Lackawanna?
That was.
It wasn't used in Lackawanna because, or why didn't the plan?
But
Planning
these
board
are the provisions specific to the denial of a certificate of appropriateness right now. This is the HPC's section, pertinent only to a certificate of
Well,
appropriateness.
maybe
The title
can
of
that
that
be
section is
put in
347,
the
140 grants or
section of
denial
the
of
zoning
certificates
for
of
the planning board?
Can we
the zoning
take that
board?
It should be a
paragraph?
general
It
ordinance.
should be in general for all the governing bodies that have
Well,
any control over demolition.
now
That
Where
should
it
be there.
says that, is
There's only one
standards,
spot for
if you
law
look at
reviews, who's gonna get it?
347, 137, it's the standards for review. General criteria for review is A, and then there's a review for various types of actions, one of which is one section of which is for demolition. Now, you're saying I'm sure you're familiar with that whole section. One is design criteria, new construction. One is review criteria for demolition. One section is criteria for relocation of buildings. And at the very beginning of all that, it says, in reviewing an application for its effect on a landmark or building or structure, et cetera, the planning board, zoning board of adjustment, township council, and HPC, or skip, and any should basically use these criteria. The following criteria shall be used by those bodies. And
These are the criteria that were referenced by the HPC in their memos.
A, B, C, D, E, and D happens to be demolition.
So could the planning board have that same exact language? And
No, it
They
is.
have it.
They have it.
They're just not doing their job.
just
There's
not-
ground
Hey,
for
say
it.
that
They're
louder.
just not doing their job.
Say that? I
Yes.
didn't hear you. Say that again? So the point is that the planning board had the full authority to deny demolition or to create impediments, but they chose not to.
I wouldn't say they have the authority to deny demolition. They have the authority to apply these criteria
And they chose
in
not to.
reviewing a demolition. The problem they have is they have, well,
I don't think they have a
the problem they have is that they really have a lot of power to regulate what's going to be built within the zoning ordinance. They have much less say in what's being torn down. It's much more,
I don't get it.
well,
Are you saying on an area of redevelopment, or are you talking about a
no,
as-right
not in a regular
application?
application. If you have a house on a lot, you want to tear down your house and build another house. If your other house is as of right, there's no setback problems, nothing. End of story. There's no review of that demolition.
But then, why would not application?
Except, actually, I'm sorry, I apologize. I misspoke, because if there's no application to the board, and that's a demolition of a historic structure, that's when you have to do a certificate of appropriateness. That's actually a situation where you do have review. You see, if somebody wants to build a house as of right, and they don't have to go in for site plan review, or they don't have any variances, then they have, and they're demolishing something which is on that 45 or 5,000 house list, then they have to come here. That's the place where you do have power. But if they throw a variance in, and go 2 feet closer to the rear yard, lo and behold, now they're in front of the Board of Adjustment, and you don't have that authority.
That's exactly the point I was making on this one application. All you have to do is just, and all of a sudden, just cuts our feet out from under us.
Well, the question is if that's the case, then the Board of Adjustment, recognizing that loophole, should, in some form or another, in the spirit of our master plan and the spirit of our laws, should either send it to us, or they should act on our behalf to,
Well, here's
or
what they
there should be
do.
a liaison on
I'm
the.
going to give this conversation 5 more minutes,
Right.
and then
Fair
we're going
enough.
to move on.
Here's what they might do.
Yes.
They might, if somebody comes in with an application like this one, which
Yeah.
requires variances, and they haven't torn down this is kind of a special, you have a historic house, you come in with an application to build something on it, which requires several variances. The board could say that in light of the fact that it's not in the public interest and not in the land use, et cetera, the master plan to demolish this historic house, we're not going to grant the variances.
That's what should have happened in Lackawanna.
I'm saying that would be their approach, and whether
If they
now
chose to.
the applicant might take them to court and say, hey, wait a second, one doesn't have anything to do with the other, but that would be a fight, and the board could probably, might as easily win as lose on that. So, I mean, I don't know.
But I think that the issue, at least with this application, where they had an application before the zoning board, but then they got permits separately, how do you capture that? They got permits for demolition separate from their application, which I don't even know how they would go about doing, because the demolition was.
Well, they
it's
applied for,
necessitated.
they went to the construction office,
Uh-huh.
applied for a demolition permit. They have to produce all these various papers from the utilities and whatnot.
Mhm.
Everything was in order. And the construction office they checked with zoning, I believe, and zoning said, well, it's not on the list. So we have nothing to say about it.
But if it- in the new,
permits were issued.
So we
But
just
the-
need to change
But in the
it so that they
expanded
expand it,
list.
and then properties like that they're going to be on the list. So that will take care of that instance. We have the statutory
Yeah.
the language in the ordinance where we can apply the criteria to limit or
Until such
impede
point that they wrap it
development.
into a site plan application.
And
But
then
But you were saying, I understand there's a gap there. They make an application to the zoning board, you're not gonna hear it for 2 or 3 months.
Mhm.
Meantime, they go and file for this demolition permit. Since the demolition permit has, in certain ways, nothing to do with the development application, as far as the construction office. Construction office hasn't seen any plans, doesn't know that they're gonna build anything. All they know is that they've come in for demolition permit.
but they do go to the zoning office for approval first.
So if the zoning, now the zoning officer looks and sees that now that this house is on the list, and then, it needs to see a certificate of appropriateness because it's on the list, then goes further and sees that there's a zoning board application.
Well, what if it
Your
doesn't see it
question
at that
is,
point?
what happens then?
no, I don't care at that point. I just want to get it past that point where they just get permits in a perfunctory manner. It's just
Right,
it
well, if
triggers
this- well, if
some
the-
sort of review where there's some board applying those
If the
criteria.
property's on the list, then any demolition permit application is going to get sent
Mhm.
to review here for certificate of appropriateness. However, if there's a development application, then
And it has a
it's
variance.
in their hands. And I think what you're trying to get at is there some way for us to stop them from demolishing their building while
Prior to
Yeah, but
submitting.
they should not be getting demolition permits before it goes before a board.
That's what I hear, and I'm not sure if that can be done or
Why not?
Here's
Why
the.
not?
And
here-
if-
here-
if- as long as it's
Because
historic.
they have a
if it's
right
on
to
the list.
demolish it, but I
But if it's on the
understand.
list.
I think what you're asking for is putting in a clause that says, in the cases of where there's a development application that involves the demolition, until such time as it goes before the board, they can't get a demolition.
But what if
No,
they-
no,
no,
can I
no,
just-
no,
can I
no.
just jump in?
Yeah,
What do you
go
think?
ahead.
That's not in what I wrote, but I could put it.
I agree with that, because another way of looking at this is someone could easily
No,
have.
I know, I'm trying, that's,
Someone who's very devious could say, I want to demolish his houses, so I'm going to apply for a site plan application. But I'll never go through with it, but I got the houses demolished.
true, they could do
Right?
that.
Right?
Well, we've seen every kind of trick imaginable. People throw in, they don't want to go in front of the planning board because they don't like how they make decisions. They want to go in front of the zoning board. They throw in a D variance, get up there. There's all kinds of shenanigans that can be accomplished.
So, I want to just understand something. If somebody, based on the new process of identifying properties that would trigger this, if somebody applied for a demolition permit without an application for a redevelopment or any sort of
Correct.
site, whatever, the building department should go to the zoning board, or the zoning office.
They will, yes.
And the zoning office would say, this is one in that zone.
Right.
But even if it doesn't, if they're gonna they're only asking for demolition, they're not asking.
Yeah.
It'll
That's
immediately
right.
trigger coming here.
That's
Correct.
Okay, but if it does have a corresponding new development application, it wouldn't go here, it would either go to the planning board or to the zoning board.
That's not
Right.
entirely true because all the properties on the list come here anyway.
Yeah.
You guys are already seeing all those properties in master plan that are identified in the master plan
We just wouldn't be
on
able to
referral.
stop demolition.
But now we will,
if it's-
because
yeah.
we're
Well,
expanding the list.
You still can't stop it.
We can't stop it eventually, but we can
We
create the
can
impediment.
stop,
Yes.
we can stop demolition
Only if it doesn't
before
have a site
board
plan
hears it.
application.
Okay, so if somebody's managed to get
Yes,
around
that's
the
exactly-
certificate of
yeah,
appropriateness
exactly.
because they have a development application, the least we could do is hold up the demolition
permit.
while the development application proceeds.
Yes.
That's what we're saying. That's, again, it's not in what I wrote, but I don't see, sounds to me like it might be able, we could put it in, first of all.
Put it in.
Because I don't mind pushing the law a little bit. The fight will come whether or not you're impeding what somebody has a right to do or not. But so what? So let them fight it out.
But
Well, I think
even
this would-
application that, they're obviously not going to not tear down their homes or those two houses because they want to put up a large house. But, we could have had them photo archive it. We could have had them give the opportunity to have the houses moved.
And the perception of the
Or
public,
sold.
and the perception of the public wouldn't be, oh, someone came in the middle of the night and knocked this down, because they still had the right ultimately to knock it
Planning board
down.
doesn't have the, I mean, okay, I got that. I'm gonna amend, unless, I'm gonna add it to what we have circulated.
Will you send it to us by the next meeting so we could look at it?
Oh,
Or,
yeah.
or the other thing is,
It'll
we
be
could have
introduced
had
in the
them
council on
prove
next
hardship
Tuesday.
and show us their finances.
one of the other
Like
things-
Donald Trump, who doesn't want to show his tax returns. I'm sure these people wouldn't want to do that either.
In Plainfield or maybe Maplewood, what I liked about their demolition ordinance is they had to make the demolition public. So they had to actually put up a sign on the site saying, to let the public know that, look, this is going to be demolished, and actually put an ad in the paper saying that we're planning on demolishing these houses.
Tell him, give it
What
to
So
sort
the
him.
public is aware,
Yeah.
and maybe
Can
you
you
get more
have-
public
There's a
input.
notice
Can I ask a question?
We
Tell
do
him
have
that.
notice requirements.
Give it to him.
Yeah.
I'll take a look and see.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, well, this was actually very productive, so.
Are we going over
As
the
long as you remember
final
it all.
report?
We have
Well,
both
well,
of
thanks for
those-
talking it through with us. and
Just before we move on,
trying to
we have both
work,
of those
you know,
provisions already in.
I think it's
Okay.
I think it's better all the way
Posted on the
around.
premises and published in the paper.
Okay,
Okay.
but what's the time limit?
Well, I'm not sure, well, the point is, the boards still have to follow their time requirements.
No, I'm talking about when they do the posting, what's the
Oh, I
time
don't
limit
know.
before they can do the demolition?
I don't know, I'd
Like
have
the
to.
same day?
Okay. So, Graham, are we discussing?
So
The
just to
final
follow up
report.
on the redevelopment historic districts in Montclair report, Mary Krugman, following her presentation in January, made a couple of final tweaks to her report. So I provided you all with a final copy of her report. Chair Bennett just wanted it listed for discussion and acceptance by the commission as the final version of the
Okay.
report. So
Is this the entire document, or was it?
that is not the entire document.
This is
The
the
entire document is
executive
140 pages. That's the text summary. Then subsequent to that is all of the appendices, individual reviews.
Do we need to formally
Mm-hmm.
adopt this?
What is it?
I think that a motion just accepting.
Okay.
Some
Can I have
kind
a
of
motion to
action.
accept the final report of Mary Krugman?
Accept it, meaning we approve of everything it says, or accept it from the point of view that we acknowledge we've received it?
That's it.
That we've
That's it.
acknowledged
The
it,
word
it's final,
accept is
this
always,
is.
it's
Yeah.
always a little bit ambiguous in that
Right.
context. Basically, you're accepting it and you're not disputing.
We've
I
received
think
it.
normally when you say accept it, you're accepting it and not really disputing the content of it. If you say you accept it with
Acknowledge we've
reservations instead of
received.
content or
Right.
something, that's a little different. I wouldn't play games with words, I would just say exactly what you mean.
So I'd say, if I may, I'd like to make a motion that we acknowledge we've received it.
Okay.
That's fine.
But, all right, motion that it's been acknowledged, receipt of the final draft.
Mhm.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then going back to the committee reports, minor applications committee, we're
We meet
meeting
tomorrow
on
morning.
four applications. And I don't think we've had any since.
It's actually 6 applications.
It's 6 now? Thanks. Thanks, Graham.
I anticipate that it will pick up as the spring
Okay.
comes. So.
And then the final order of business is addressing Lackawanna Plaza. And I'm going to give each of the commissioners 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 5 minutes.
Can I
Speak
give
your
my
piece.
time to someone else?
No. No, we're not doing that.
Okay, don't they do that?
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congress can do.
Okay, well, I think there are a couple resolutions we'd like to put before the HPC to be voted on. Perhaps it can't be voted on tonight, but we'd like to distribute those ultimately between now and the next meeting so that they can be voted on in the next meeting, just to get certain statements on the record about Lackawanna Plaza. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
Yeah, anything that you have that you want to distribute now, you can distribute now, and then, 2 weeks before the next meeting, anything that any resolutions, any statements that you want.
I have two things. Three.
Send it to myself, Kathleen, and Graham, and it'll be put on the agenda.
Did I say that? I'll pass it down? Okay.
Do we,
And then there's another one. Did I
should
give
they
you
go
that?
to Graham and also?
We'll give it to him.
Okay. So I'm gonna start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So first I'd like to read something for the public record. Someplace, not any place. We're all from someplace, a place that has special meaning to us. But those some places are being lost, torn down, destroyed, and are becoming any place. They look the same as everywhere else. Montclair is not any place. It is recognized globally as a singular and extraordinary in spirit and beauty and culture and diversity in its history and its perennial vibrancy. We are stewards and protectors of our someplace. Whether working on a private home in need of conservation, a building renovation, a commercial downtown district, or a new commercial development, the HPC considers it our highest responsibility to serve the larger community in both physical and social form. In our evaluation of applications, we maintain our innate respect for a project's context and its significance. We are guided by the spirit of the community and who we are as people. We consider the long-term growth and evolution of our community. We endorse projects that provide lasting and meaningful public and private benefit. We believe architecture to be transformative. Our environment is our world. The past informs our present. The present informs our future. We serve to honor our past, enrich our future by preserving who we are and where we've been. We must all honor, protect, and continue to progress the great aesthetic and architectural achievements of our most inspired Montclair predecessors. The HPC, as engaged residents, community volunteers, and architecturally and historically literate professionals, pursue this responsibility of stewardship seriously, with the highest level of integrity, with only the best interest of the greater good of our shared community. I'm proposing a resolution, among others. One in particular I'd like to read, very brief. The HPC liaison, the fidelity to the positions of the HPC. The resolution, as proposed in form, the HPC liaison to the planning board henceforth will be obligated to adhere to the established will and memorialized positions of the HPC. He/she must be prepared to advocate for this position substantively and vigorously in his or her role in deliberations on the planning board and vote consistently with the will of the HPC, or must recuse his or himself from participating in the deliberation on the hearing of the application to the planning board. This is a resolution that I wish to propose. In addition, we have specific language highly critical of the planning board evaluation of the Lackawanna project. We find that the recent planning board's approval of the proposed Lackawanna site is substantively and procedurally defective and incomplete. We reject the planning board statements that the train sheds are not historic, and the parking lot as approved is in keeping with the master plan. The language of the master plan dictates that we in the HPC and as a community are committed to safeguarding the heritage of Montclair by preserving resources within the township which reflect elements of cultural, social, economic, and architectural history. The HPC finds that Lackawanna possesses all of these attributes. We dispute the position of Dr. Stephen Bedford, the positions of planner Stephen Moronsky as not credible and simply paid mercenaries who were willing to defy the basic values and principles of their profession. We find the position put forth by John Wynn relating to the parking lot being not excessively large or out of scale to be entirely specious. At 375 feet, greater in length than a professional football field, including the goal zones with room to spare, is inappropriate and detrimental to Bloomfield Avenue Commercial and Historic District. We find the position put forth by Commissioner Broderick relating to the fact that he was not clear the platform section of the Lackawanna Station was included in the historic designation of the site. Again, we find that specious. We find that the historic designation documentation clearly and unequivocally identifies the full and specific scope of the site, including specific reference and inventory to the track platforms and passenger canopies, and clearly defines the boundaries between Grove Street, Bloomfield Avenue, Glen Ridge, and Lackawanna Plaza. My last point, we find Commissioner Gilman's position that the site has lost its historical significance to again be specious and absolutely unfounded. The original site is fully intact and in place. The adaptive reuse in the 1980s was overseen by the foremost architectural preservationist, Richard Blinder of Buyer Blinder Bell, and was 100% consistent with the best practices and best principles of historic preservation.
Time.
There's additional information for the next meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Kane-Levy.
Will you indulge me and let me read the 2 pages that I've prepared? I don't know. They didn't time myself, so I don't know whether they fit within your limit.
Go. Go for it.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on some of the things that I've been thinking about since the Lackawanna decision was made, and some of this was already I presented at the hearing as a resident of Montclair, but I'd like to reiterate them, and there's some more observations. Okay. There is irony in the fact that threats to another train station, Grand Central Station, led to the 1978 Supreme Court ruling upholding the New York City Landmarks Law as a valid public purpose. This came after the tragic loss of Penn Station in 1963. Lackawanna has survived threats as well, and in the early 70s was saved from the wrecking ball in a hard-fought battle against urban renewal and an ill-advised redevelopment plan. It was subsequently put on the state and national registers of historic places, designated locally, and adaptively reused with federal funding to become the enclosed mall we see today. None of this critical information was shared with the HPC or Planning Board when a new outrageous development was floated last year and ultimately dropped. It made the current plan look almost reasonable in our initial review, which may have been the strategy by the developer. What I'm seeing today here in Montclair is a throwback to the short-sighted attitudes of 40 years ago. During my 30-year career at the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, I've seen countless buildings restored and adaptively reused. Demolition of a historic building that was not altered beyond all recognition or was not structurally beyond repair is practically unheard of, and certainly I've never seen a sound, intact historic building which is locally designated and on the state and national registers approved for demolition. Why is this the case? The answer is simple. Adaptive reuse is commercially viable in almost every case. The only thing preventing it is a lack of creativity and will. Developers come and go, but we as townspeople have a responsibility to protect the buildings that make Montclair the special place we call home. The so-called compromise that the applicant has proposed is not historic preservation. The columns and the concrete canopies are one, and the proposal to demolish the historic structure and reuse the fragments in the parking lot removes the canopies from their historic context, rendering them meaningless. Instead, the portion of the building that should be removed is a non-historic pathmark addition. One of the important things that a historic preservation law, including Montclair's Historic Preservation Ordinance, brings to the conversation is that the developer has the burden to show that an important and vital historic building cannot be retained and reused. Furthermore, the developer is seeking a variance and must also meet strict standards under the municipal land use law based on hardship. It's well settled in New Jersey law that a party seeking a variance must demonstrate, quote, special reasons beyond the party's own desires. A party seeking a variance cannot self-create undue hardship. Moreover, the variance should be granted only if there is not, quote, substantial detriment to the public good and will not substantially impair the intent and the purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance, unquote. Here, the developer's variances are directly tied to the demolition of a historic structure important to the town and region, yet that they have failed to satisfy the heavy burden of proof. They have not proven that the only way to bring a supermarket to the site is to demolish the sheds. They have not proven that the structure is not historic or has been architecturally compromised. At least 3 other consultants hired by the town itself have disputed the applicant's hired expert's testimony. They have not investigated valuable state and federal tax credits for historic preservation, and we should note that there are additional state tax credits coming shortly. They have not made a case for the town, why the town should approve an application with variances that contradict the master plan, which calls for safeguarding the heritage of Montclair by preserving resources within the township which reflect elements of cultural, social, economic, and architectural history. Lackawanna possesses all of these attributes. They are asking for a 400-plus car parking variance in an already parking-starved downtown. I recently visited the Lidl site in Union and noticed that the displays are modular units on wheels, and the building is daylighted by huge clear-story windows. Both of these observations are at odds with the developer's testimony that the columns would interfere with display installations and the skylights cannot support supermarket use. These are the substantive reasons why the planning board's decision was flawed. However, there are procedural reasons as well. I take issue with the fact that Pinnacle never revealed a tenant until the last possible minute, and that a supermarket representative was not allowed to be questioned or to affirm the claims of the developer. I'm almost done. I take issue with the way the chairman led the meeting, refusing the HPC to provide additional expert witnesses and not allowing members of the public to speak who did not live in Montclair. I checked, and this is nowhere accounted for in the bylaws. I take issue with the fact that the planning board lawyer told the applicant to prepare a report on whether there may in fact be easements or deed restrictions dating from the 1980s federally funded adoptive reuse rather than researching his own. I take issue with the fact that at the last possible minute, the entire program was revised to include a much smaller supermarket with very different loading and parking requirements, and a vote was taken without any questioning or time for additional review by other agencies or interested parties. Finally, I take exceptional issue at the way the HPC has been marginalized during this entire process, and our representative on the planning board made no effort to support our concerns. If the plans go forward for demolition and the construction of a white box for a big box store, given the changing nature of the supermarket industry, we may end up with a white elephant in no time and a parking lot the size of a football field tearing a hole in the historic fabric of the town center historic district. If the supermarket fails, the historic building will be gone, and what will be left is a very large development site. And perhaps that is what the developer is hoping. Thank you.
Mr. Rooney?
Yeah, points well taken. That I'm also afraid of is this thing will not work. You know, that the grocery store is not going to happen, or any store is going to happen. I think their main problem with this whole site is that we had to put a grocery store there. And if we didn't, maybe we could have done something else. But apparently that's coming from the city council that they wanted the grocery store there. So.
Any comments, Mr. Connolly?
Just that I agree 100% with Mr. Greenwell on this leaving. You have my previous comments.
Thank you. So what I'm inclined to do is, if anybody has the full written statements, if you want to submit that, we can have a resolution acknowledging the full statement into the record. It's not necessarily an endorsement by the commission as a whole, because then we would have to dicker about whether we agree or not. This is an acknowledgement that, these are the statements that you made, and we're putting it into the record. And then we can have subsequent resolutions addressing the specific courses of action that you want to take going forward. And again, those proposed resolutions should be submitted at least 2 weeks before the next meeting, so they can put on the agenda, people can review them, and then we can deliberate and address them.
If there is a desire to have a non-traditional meeting called by a quorum to review these?
What do you mean, a special meeting?
Special meeting.
So we'd only be addressing this?
Is that a possibility? Is that within the bounds of acceptability?
Yeah, we just have to give notice, and we have to have the space for it.
The chair can call a special meeting, or a quorum of the members, or a certain number of members. I have to look at the ordinance.
I think it's a quorum.
Could authorize a special meeting, but then it's just the same as, it's just like a regular meeting. It's just that it's not on the initial schedule.
Right.
If you want to hear what the amendment I was thinking of adding to the demolition, it's something like this. A permit to demolish or partly demolish a historic structure, which we've defined as all of these things, where a development application has been filed with the Planning Board or Board of Adjustment, shall not be issued during the pendency of the development application. In the event that the development application is denied or withdrawn or terminated for any reason, the demolition permit shall not issue until the requirements of Section 137-136, which is the, Section 347-136, which is the certificate of appropriateness section, and the sections, and I'm going to add the rest of the sections involved, have been followed and completed. I think that'll fly, and I haven't seen that in any other ordinance.
We should take a look at maybe Maplewood in your, just before you finalize.
I don't remember seeing that.
No, but Mr. Connolly mentioned.
Well, yeah, let me see what he puts together, and then I'll compare it to
All right,
the other.
will you communicate through us or through him?
Well,
or?
just for process, so the council's planning to introduce the ordinance,
The council's going to have this
and they
on
have to, there's a referral requirement to both the planning board, and will also come here for review.
This will be listed for
Okay.
it'll be listed for discussion on the council meeting on next Tuesday. I'm going to add this to what I already gave them, and then they can decide whether they want to introduce it. We're going to recommend introducing it because then it gets sent to the planning board and to you guys, and therefore there could be a discussion. And if the discussion results in changes that the council wants to make, then we'll make the changes, but it's good to get it started. If you don't introduce it, you don't start it going. So it'll be up to them, but it will be, it's right now scheduled on the agenda for discussion and possible introduction.
There are no prior resolutions, so may I have a motion to adjourn?
Second. Oh, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
House and our kids, I mean, the best thing I've done in Montclair was to raise two wonderful sons who went through all of the Montclair schools, and that's my claim to fame.
Montclair has good school systems.
Yes.
Always has.
'Yes. Yes.
Right. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, so you, I don't know if you want to are still working a bit, I understand.
I work a few days a week. I'm a clinical social worker. I worked for years for a family service agency nearby. And when I left that, I thought, well, I'll see a few people at home, you know, in an office, private practice.